On the stage of comedy, Jim Carrey was a storm no one could contain. With just a twitch of his face, an exaggerated gesture, or a rubber-like contortion of his body, audiences erupted in laughter. In The Mask, he became Hollywood's human cartoon, an actor who could defy physical limits and turned absurdity into art. Throughout the 1,992nd, Jim Carrey wasn't just a comedian, he was a phenomenon. From Ace Ventura to Dumb and Dumber, from Liar Liar to The Truman Show, his name guaranteed laughter and box office gold. But the stage lights that illuminated his genius also hid a darker truth. Behind the mask of comedy lived a man haunted by emptiness, depression, and the unbearable shadow of loss. The suicide of his girlfriend, Catriona White, plunged him into scandal, guilt, and public scrutiny. At the same time, his strange, almost prophetic statements about life and death made the world question whether he was a visionary or simply losing his mind. In one interview, he declared, "I discovered the truth. Jim Carrey doesn't exist. There is only nothingness." The words stunned audiences. Here was one of the most successful comedians in Hollywood, standing on a red carpet, denying his own existence. Behind the endless laughter, Jim Carrey was waging a battle that few understood, and perhaps, in his search for meaning, death itself became an obsession. But the truth behind it is much darker. Long before the world knew Jim Carrey as the man of 1,000 faces, he was just a boy growing up in the cold suburbs of Ontario, Canada. Born on the 17th of January, 1962 in Newmarket, Jim was the youngest of 4 children in a working-class family. His father, Percy, was a talented saxophone player who once dreamed of a career in show business, but settled for a steady job as an accountant to support the family. His mother, Kathleen, battled chronic illness, often leaving young Jim surrounded by both love and fragility. At first glance, the Carreys seemed like any ordinary Canadian family, but underneath, they lived with financial instability that would soon shape Jim's worldview. When Percy lost his job, the family's life unraveled. They were forced to live in a Volkswagen van parked on the edge of a relative's lawn. For a time, the Carreys were effectively homeless. Jim was just a teenager then, and instead of after-school hangouts or carefree weekends, he worked as a janitor alongside his brother to keep the family afloat. This period planted the seeds of 2 powerful forces in Jim's life: resilience and absurdity. To cope with the crushing weight of poverty and uncertainty, Jim discovered his own peculiar form of escape comedy. He began mimicking teachers at school, imitating celebrities, and practicing wild facial contortions in the mirror. His classmates laughed, but for Jim, laughter was more than entertainment, it was survival. Every exaggerated gesture, every outburst of humor was a shield against despair. At home, the stage was even smaller but more urgent. His mother, often bedridden due to illness, found relief in her son's antics. Jim would burst into a room, slip into impressions, or craft surreal characters just to make her laugh. In those moments, he wasn't just a boy trying to be funny. He was a son desperate to heal his mother's pain with the only medicine he had: laughter. Years later, Carrey would admit that much of his comedy was born not from joy, but from a desperate attempt to hold his family together. Despite his hardships, there were early signs of the genius he would become. At just 10 years old, Jim wrote a letter to the Carol Burnett Show, offering his services as a young comedian. He believed he could bring something fresh to television. Though he never received a reply, the audacity of that act revealed a young boy convinced he was destined for something larger. Still, the road ahead was not glamorous. At age 16, Jim dropped out of school to focus on supporting his family. By then, he was performing in small comedy clubs around Toronto. His first stand-up gigs were brutal. He bombed repeatedly, facing silence, hecklers, and rejection. His style, too exaggerated and bizarre, baffled audiences at first. Many thought he was simply too much, but Carrey refused to quit. Each failure only sharpened his determination to break through. Comedy, for Jim, was not just a career aspiration. It was his escape hatch from a life that seemed designed to crush him. The boy who once cleaned factory floors with his family now stood on stage, bending his body into shapes, stretching his face into impossible expressions, and chasing laughter like oxygen. It was in those dingy clubs that Carrey forged the raw, unfiltered version of himself that Hollywood would one day pay millions to see. And yet, even in those early years, a paradox formed. Jim Carrey could make the world laugh, but he could never fully quiet the unease within himself. The masks he wore were already beginning to blur with reality, setting the stage for both his meteoric rise and his eventual descent into darkness. By the late 1972nd, Jim Carrey had already decided he wasn't going to let poverty define him. At just 17, he was performing regularly in Toronto's comedy clubs. His act was unlike anything audiences had seen before. He bent his body into impossible contortions, transformed his face like clay, and shifted between impressions so rapidly it felt as though multiple people were living inside him. Yet, success didn't come immediately. Crowds often sat in stunned silence, unsure if they were witnessing brilliance or madness. But Jim's relentless drive and his willingness to fail carried him forward. He studied his heroes, from Jerry Lewis to Andy Kaufman, dissecting their timing and absurdity. He sharpened his impressions, from Clint Eastwood's growl to Jack Nicholson's manic grin, until they became uncannily accurate. Slowly, the tide began to turn. Local comedy fans started to whisper about the strange young man who could transform into anyone. Then came a pivotal moment. Rodney Dangerfield, the legendary American comedian, caught one of Carrey's shows. Recognizing his raw talent, Rodney invited him to tour as his opening act. For Jim, it was a life-changing break, a ticket out of Canada and into the heart of the American comedy scene. In the early 1982nd, he moved to Los Angeles, chasing the dream that had seemed so impossible when he was cleaning factory floors just a few years earlier. Hollywood, however, was unforgiving. Carrey landed small roles on television shows and movies, but they were forgettable. Casting directors often found him too extreme, struggling to place him in conventional roles. For a while, it seemed his wild energy might never find a home. But Jim refused to be tamed. Everything changed with In Living Color, the groundbreaking sketch comedy show that premiered in 1990. Surrounded by the Wayans family and a roster of sharp comedic talent, Jim Carrey, nicknamed the White Guy on the cast, stood out instantly. His over-the-top characters, like the fire marshal with explosive antics, became fan favorites. Carrey finally had a stage big enough to unleash his madness, and America couldn't look away. From there, the rise was meteoric. In 1994 alone, Carrey released 3 box office smashes: Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, The Mask, and Dumb and Dumber. Each film showcased a different side of his comic genius, slapstick absurdity, cartoon-like elasticity, and ridiculous yet oddly lovable buffoonery. Hollywood had never seen anything like it. Practically overnight, Jim Carrey went from struggling comic to one of the highest paid actors in the world. By the mid-92nd, he was commanding $20 million per film, a figure unheard of for a comedian at the time. Audiences lined up to see him twist his face, stretch his body, and deliver lines in a way that seemed simultaneously chaotic and precise. The world didn't just laugh with Carrey, they marveled at him. Yet, as his fame skyrocketed, cracks began to show. Beneath the rubber-faced antics was a man wrestling with profound unease. Carrey admitted he felt hollow after performances, as though laughter filled everyone else but left him empty. The more famous he became, the more he questioned the meaning of it all. Even in his most successful period, Jim yearned to be seen as more than a clown. He took on riskier roles, proving his depth as an actor. In The Truman Show, 1998, he stunned critics with a performance that was both heartbreaking and unsettling, exploring themes of surveillance, reality, and control. In Man on the Moon, 1999, his portrayal of Andy Kaufman blurred the lines between acting and obsession, so much so that crew members later said Carrey seemed to become Kaufman off-screen as well. These roles earned him critical acclaim and Golden Globe awards, cementing him not just as a comedian but as a serious actor. Yet with every accolade came a lingering paradox. Jim Carrey could conquer Hollywood, but he could not conquer himself. For while the world crowned him the king of comedy, Jim was already feeling the pull of something darker, a growing sense that his fame, fortune, and laughter were meaningless. The same wild energy that had propelled him to the top would soon begin to spiral inward, dragging him toward the shadows he had spent his life trying to escape. By the early 2002nd, the laughter that had once defined Jim Carrey's life began to feel hollow. Behind the public persona of the elastic-faced comic genius, a darker struggle was unfolding. Carrey's private life was fraught with heartbreak, legal battles, and a growing obsession with the deeper questions of existence. One of the most devastating blows came in 2015 with the death of his girlfriend, Catriona White. The young makeup artist's suicide left Carrey reeling, both emotionally and publicly. The tragedy was compounded by lawsuits from her family, accusing him of contributing to her death. Paparazzi cameras captured him in moments of grief and isolation, and tabloid headlines painted him alternately as a grieving partner and a man embroiled in scandal. It was a painful reminder that even a man who could command global laughter was not immune to suffering. Around the same time, Carrey's mental and emotional state began to attract public attention in more unusual ways. Known for his eccentric, almost philosophical musings, he made statements that both puzzled and alarmed audiences. In interviews, he spoke of self as illusion, fame as empty, and the world as a stage of meaningless performance. He once told a reporter, "The effect you have on others is the most valuable currency there is. Not money, not fame, not accolades, but how you move people." While profound, these reflections revealed a man wrestling with existential questions far beyond the scope of comedy. Carrey's eccentricities extended into his daily life. He would post cryptic messages on social media, paint surreal portraits, and discuss concepts like reincarnation and the nature of reality with a seriousness that made some observers uncomfortable. The line between performance and authenticity blurred. Fans sometimes wondered, was Jim Carrey still an entertainer? Or had he become an enigmatic philosopher trying to escape the prison of his own fame? In Hollywood, these struggles affected his career. Offers for blockbuster comedy slowed as studios became wary of his unpredictability. Carrey, ever the risk-taker, did not conform. He refused to compromise on roles that challenged him artistically, and he openly criticized the superficiality of the industry. He became a symbol of rebellion, but also of isolation, an artist too intense, too honest for a world accustomed to laughter without reflection. His personal life mirrored this tension. Carrey's high-profile relationships ended in heartbreak, further deepening his sense of vulnerability. He battled depression using meditation, therapy, and even experimental treatments to stabilize his mind. Despite the outward success, there was a growing dissonance. The man who made the world laugh could barely sustain joy within himself. Even as critics lauded his dramatic roles in films like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, 2004, Carrey confessed that fame had come at a cost. He described the experience as living inside a bubble, where every reaction is amplified and every mistake is immortalized. The pressures of Hollywood, once a dream, had become a cage. And yet, in these darkest moments, Carrey's genius persisted. He channeled his pain into art, creating works that were both disturbing and captivating. Stand-up routines became introspective, paintings revealed raw emotion, and interviews transformed into philosophical explorations. He had become a man at war with himself, a clown whose laughter hid profound existential torment. Today, Jim Carrey stands as a paradox, a man whose life is a testament to both boundless creativity and profound vulnerability. From the streets of Ontario to the glittering stages of Hollywood, his journey has been one of triumph, tragedy, and relentless self-inquiry. He remains celebrated as one of the greatest comedic talents of his generation, a performer capable of transforming even the simplest gesture into a moment of pure magic. Yet, the true legacy of Jim Carrey lies beyond the laughter he provokes. His story is a mirror to the human condition, a reminder that genius and suffering often coexist, that brilliance can emerge from chaos, and that the masks we wear may conceal deep, unspoken truths. He has shown the world that comedy can be both a shield and a scalpel, that laughter can heal but also expose the fragility of the soul. Carrey's influence extends beyond film. His work in dramatic roles, his philosophical interviews, and his visual art offer insight into a mind unafraid to question the very foundations of existence. He has inspired countless performers to embrace risk, to explore vulnerability, and to challenge the boundaries of their craft. His life is proof that creativity often demands confrontation with pain, and that true artistry requires both courage and authenticity. And yet, Carrey's story carries a cautionary weight. Fame, wealth, and applause are not shields against grief or existential struggle. The boy who once escaped poverty through laughter reminds us that even in a world of adoration, inner battles persist. His journey compels reflection. The masks we admire may conceal a landscape far more complex than we imagine. Jim Carrey continues to create, to speak, and to inspire. His laughter endures, but so does the depth of his introspection. He has faced tragedy head-on, wrestled with his inner demons, and emerged with a voice uniquely his own. The world remembers him for his comedy, but his life teaches us something far more enduring: the pursuit of truth, the courage to feel, and the power of embracing both light and darkness. As audiences laugh at his performances, they are witnessing not just a comedian, but a man who has transformed personal pain into art, who has made the world reflect, and who reminds us that behind every smile may lie a story far deeper than we ever imagined. Jim Carrey's life remains an ongoing journey, a testament to resilience, creativity, and the human spirit. In the end, he is not just a performer, but a mirror of our own struggles, triumphs, and the relentless pursuit of meaning in a world that rarely offers easy answers.